Well, Joe, I think there are some elements of that bill, a small part of it, that actually could be bipartisan. I think anything that deals with roads and bridges and transportation is something that in the past has enjoyed broad bipartisan support. We consider that to be basic infrastructure. You might be able to add broadband to that. But the Democrats have defined infrastructure to be pretty much anything. I mean, they've thrown schools in there, housing in there, daycare in there, healthcare in there. They have just loaded this bill up with I mean, this is a huge, massive expansion of the federal government, and very little, 6% of that bill actually has anything to do with infrastructure. So is there a path forward to get a bipartisan bill? It is, but it'd have to be both in size and scope and substance. It'd have to be modified dramatically from where they've started. I mean, that is a tremendous amount of spending, all paid for either by new tax increases, which would be crushing to the economy, or more debt, which would be even put at greater risk and threaten the future of our children and grandchildren as we continue to pile up trillions and trillions and trillions of more debt. This administration seems to think that it's just an ATM card, plug it in, and we can just spend as much money as we want to. And I'm telling you, I think there's going to be a rude awakening someday, and I believe that the American people realize that this is way too much spending, way too much debt, and are going to hate any tax increases that might come their way that would crush what we're seeing right now, and that is some significant hope of economic recovery.
I'm glad you bring that point up, because we start off with a massive $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that had very little to do with COVID. It seems as if the Biden administration believes that they were the first ones to start writing checks. It doesn't seem to make any sense. We now find ourselves with an infrastructure plan, which, to your point, has very little to do with infrastructure. And it seems in many ways as if Joe Biden's vision for the future of America is to retrofit the 20th century for a 21st century world, when you start talking about Amtrak or things of that nature. And none of that does anything to make sure that America remains a preeminent force as we head towards making sure that we are the dominant voice moving forward.
Well, right, Joe. I mean, what it does is it grows government. It gives government a much larger role, and steps on the innovation, the creativity, the entrepreneurship that the private economy can generate. I mean, one of the things that we know about our country is we're very resilient, and we've already seen as the economy has started to bounce back. In fact, they're telling us this year that even if we didn't do anything, and this was before the passage of the $2 trillion bill, that we would see 3.7% economic growth this year. And the economy is coming back. The vaccine is making a huge difference. It is a difference maker. It's a game changer for people out there who are now going out with more confidence and resuming their normal activities. And what we're seeing is the economy start to pick up, jobs being added. We saw great jobs numbers this weekend. And what I fear is going to happen is massive tax increases, a lot more government control, heavy regulation and mandates and requirements coming out of Washington is going to stifle what is a really exciting story. And that is an economy that after a year of just struggling through this pandemic is starting to roar again. And this could be like pouring water or a big wet blanket on top of an economy that's taking off. And that's what I think is going to happen if they move forward with this massive, on top of the $2 trillion they already passed, another $2 to $3 trillion of spending. Most of it unrelated to infrastructure, which is the stated purpose of this in the first place. And as I said, loaded up with more taxes and more debt. That is not a good combination or good formula for economic growth and job creation for the future. And I think the American people should be very wary of and pushing back hard. And we will be pushing back hard in Congress against that agenda.
But talk to us a little bit about the unintended consequences of this nearsighted approach to the crisis on the border, the sex trafficking of those children that we know is occurring, the abuse that women have faced on the pathway to get to America. And none of this deals with the very real threat of national security that we know has to be baked into any strategy along our southern border, where we know we have to get it right every day, but terrorists only have to get it right one time.
Right. And I think the thing that's most important to note about this and what we heard last weekend, Joe, is that this was entirely preventable. It was entirely avoidable. The Border Patrol met more than once with the Biden transition team and forewarned them that if they change these policies on remain in Mexico, if they quit building the border wall, if they went away from the emergency declaration, and a bunch of other policies right now that have helped keep the border from exploding down there, that this is what was going to happen. They predicted this. They forewarned them, and they did it anyway. The Biden administration knew full well going into this that what the Border Patrol had told them and the concerns that they had, and nevertheless they went forward. And so now you got 50% of the border control spending their time taking care of unaccompanied children, minors who come into this country in these facilities, rather than doing what you pointed out, and that is enforcing the border, keeping the country safe from the drug smugglers and the human traffickers, and who knows what other elements might try and find their way across the border. But they suspended the building of the border wall, and that, according to the Border Patrol, is incredibly important in terms of their efforts to secure the border. I just think that this is a disaster of their own making, entirely avoidable. And the only thing now that can change it is they've got to start enforcing immigration laws. They've got to continue with building the wall. They've got to go back to some of these policies that were effective and working, like keeping asylum seekers in Mexico until their cases were heard and adjudicated instead of admitting them into the country. There are just so many policies that they reversed. And as a consequence of that, we've got communities down there that are swamped and a humanitarian crisis. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of young kids who are part of this, and they're being used. And smugglers and traffickers are being enriched by the amount of money they're charging and the way they're using these kids to do bad things and create a lot of bad activity along the border and bring it into this country. It is a tragedy, and it's got to stop. And the administration, they have got to put a stop to it. I hope they're getting that message, but we need to keep putting pressure on them.
Is there an area where you think you can find common ground with some Democrats who may look at this alternative reality that the left is trying to usher in and realize that it's bad for achieving the America that we all deserve?
I hope, Joe, that there are a few thoughtful Democrats out there that will come to their senses and say, we can't abide this. We can't tolerate this. It has overwhelmed Border Patrol. It has overwhelmed the communities on the border, and it is bringing a lot of bad stuff into the country. Now, to be fair, I mean, these kids, we have to be sympathetic. These are little kids that are being preyed upon. They're being packed like sardines into these facilities down there. But the truth of the matter is that if there are Democrats who are sincere about doing what's right for these kids and their families, they would help work with us to restore order on the border, to continue to build the border wall, to enforce immigration laws. And if we're going to bring people into this country, create a legal way to do it, but encourage people to come here legally, discourage illegal immigration. And right now it's the opposite of that. We've got a green light up there and a welcome sign for people to come across the border illegally. And they're coming by the thousands. I mean, that's the message this administration is sending. And it starts with securing the border. Then those other conversations that you were talking about that Democrats want to have, we can talk about the dreamers and that sort of thing. But you can't do that until you stop the flow. And the Democrats right now, at least most Democrats, don't seem interested in stopping the flow. They believe in an open border, and an open, porous border becomes an invitation to a lot of bad activity and exploitation by the people like the traffickers and the smugglers and the cartels who are using this to make massive amounts of money on the backs of a lot of kids and families, and at the expense of the American people who are going to have to deal with the crisis that this is creating, not only at the border, but as it moves further into this country.